Chris, a young boy, longs to become a superhero, and he goes so far as to create an alter ego for himself named Captain Spirit. Captain Spirit has the power to manipulate all matter at will, and Chris immerses himself in a world of superheroes and villains to help him cope with abuse he experiences in his real life. By burying himself in this alternate reality, Chris finds a way to deal with the difficulties of his daily life. Hi folks, I'm R, your narrator, and welcome to the awesome adventures of Captain Spirit. If you have any video or game suggestions, make sure to send them to me on my Twitter or subreddit. Keep in mind that this video will have spoilers, and with that in mind, let's begin. On an ordinary Saturday morning, Chris starts his day with his favorite pastime, drawing. He imagines Captain Spirit saving the day with his incredible powers of bending all matter to his will and drawing the hero. After his morning drawing session, Chris explores the room. Many things in his room have stopped working or are not properly taken care of, like his console or TV. For Christmas, he writes a letter to Santa asking him for drawing paper, pens, and a new console because he enjoys drawing and playing games as any child usually does. From the letter, it is clear that he also wants to learn basketball to keep his dad happy. This indicates that his dad values his sports and wants his son to play it too. Even though Chris seems happy playing by himself and with his imaginary friends, he seems lonely because when he picks up the walkie-talkie, he doesn't seem to talk through it to a friend, but rather he talks to himself, imagining that he's talking to another imaginary person he calls the Sky Pirate. Soon enough, Chris is called to the kitchen to have breakfast. It seems that he is raised by a single father, Charles, who has a drinking problem. Even though it's early in the morning, the father seems to have already finished his third pint of beer. It's likely the mother has passed away, and the father seems shaken by her disappearance as the circles under his eyes suggest he's not taking it well and taking care of himself. A loving, supportive child, Chris seems upset by his mother's absence as well, but he tries to keep it in and stay positive so he can uplift his father's spirits, who seems more in need of support than the child Chris. Chris is clearly unhappy about his father's drinking habits and seems nervous at the sight of the alcohol. He confronts his dad about it, suggesting he shouldn't drink so early in the morning and should have breakfast with him instead. Chris's father Charles then dismisses Chris's request by saying that since it's a game day today, he can drink whenever he wants without being lectured by his own son. The father then swears and complains about his life and the quiet town that they live in, trying to excuse his drinking problems. Chris calms his dad and tries to make him smile, showing he might be more mature than his own father, putting his father's needs above his own. As of course, when there's a lack of a mature and leading character available, one has to take responsibility and take everything else in their own hands. And that, unfortunately, befalls a child and innocent Chris. There's a large bruise on Chris's arm, and his father, in a strange way, asks about it as if being ashamed, in an effort to learn whether he told about his injury to anyone else, implying that Chris may have developed this bruise on his arm as a result of Charles. Chris appears agitated because questions concerning the bruise makes him remember the unpleasant experiences that he'd rather not revisit. The father abruptly changes the topic and decides to talk about Christmas instead, which almost immediately makes Chris happy. Christmas is approaching, and Chris, like any child, is excited for presents and a Christmas tree. His father, on the other hand, appears to be struggling financially, but Chris appears to be content with small things like getting a new basketball or going Christmas tree shopping with his father, desperately trying to spend time with him and gain his approval. After a few beers, the father encourages his son to go outside and play by himself, while reaching into the cupboard for something slightly stronger to accompany him while he watches a basketball game on television. Chris witnesses his father carrying a large bottle of booze, but decides to dismiss it and retrieve to his imaginary world of Captain Spirit, as the alternative would be a dark and gloomy world to visit. Chris, bored, explores the house, going through his father's laptop, which provides Chris with further insight into his father's life and troubles. He notices that his father is desperate for a new job and is considering attending classes to sell property. Based on an email from Charles' supervisor, Mike Stevenson, he appears to be working for Northwest Railway at present. Charles appears to be mentally unstable, as his supervisor advises in the email that he has a bit of a reputation around Northwest and should not be provoked into confrontation by the young freight hoppers. Charles also appears to be quite involved in basketball games, keeping score, which appears to be one of his unfulfilled aspirations, which explains why Chris would like to learn how to play basketball well so that he can fulfill his father's childhood dreams. Next to the laptop, there's a letter addressed to Chris's father, Charles. The letter's author expresses concern for Charles' well-being following the departure of his wife, Emily. They also express their desire that they can care for Chris while Charles seeks appropriate treatment, indicating that they are aware of Charles' drinking and temper issues and wish to assist. The letter's author is Emily's parents or Chris's grandparents, who communicate that their daughter, Emily, is no longer with them, but they are still a family and wish to help. Based on a picture on one of the shelves, his father had a close friend named Nick, but after his wife died, he seems to have isolated himself from everything and everyone, not spending time with friends or relatives. Even though Charles appears to be attempting to be a nice father to Chris and try to do everything in his power, making him breakfast and interacting with him, he lacks motivation in playing games or amusing Chris, preferring to drink and watch the game all day rather than spending time with his son. Of course, he has a lot of inner demons that he needs to defeat before being present to Chris as a genuine and nice father. A father that he truly wants to be. Chris notices several books on the bookshelf and comments that he would love to go on a walk with his mom, implying that it was her book as she enjoyed hiking and spending time outside a lot, as well as art. She intentionally spoiled Chris by buying him a lot of comic books, implying that she was a great mother who wanted the best for him. While exploring his parents' bedroom, Chris notices hints of a height grudge on the side of the wardrobe, indicating the parents or perhaps his mother, Emily, measured how fast he grew all the way until he was 7 years old. He also reminisces on good times when his mother and father would allow him to sleep with them when he was scared, implying his mother passed away when he was around 7 years old only, as that's when taking measurements ceased to happen. Chris also notes that the father retained Chris's drawings of him playing basketball, implying that the father had an unfulfilled dream of being a basketball player, which has now come tumbling down since he has lost his wife and does not feel fulfilled in life, which caused him to be abusive towards his son and to be a drunk. Chris discovers the wardrobe key hidden under a lamp on the bedside table. In the wardrobe, he finds love letters to his father from a woman named Audra. Chris is astonished to learn that his father has found someone and has kept it from him. Another letter from a 12-year-old fan reveals that the father played basketball in high school, confirming his never-fulfilled dream of being drafted and becoming an NBA player like he always wanted to be. This explains his behavior watching the game and becoming furious whenever a team member makes a mistake, claiming that he would be much better at it than they are. Chris hopes his father's alcohol would simply dissipate, noting that drinking transforms him, making him angry and abusive, unable to manage his temper. Charles appears embarrassed about his drinking problem, but he is too addicted and too weak to alter it, which is why anytime Chris points out his drinking or glances at the bottle, Charles attempts to hide it or becomes irritated with him. Chris phones Mrs. Reynolds, his neighbor, and asks whether Steven, a man who assisted his father in building a treehouse, would be willing to assist them in adding some booby traps to the treehouse so that he can keep the evil men at bay. Mrs. Reynolds is perplexed by this remark, wondering to whom Chris is referring to, but Chris quickly disconnects the call, not wanting to elaborate on that any further. This in a way creates some hints to some sinister secrets that Chris might be hiding from his dad. Maybe during his phases of being passed out drunk, Charles does unspeakable things to Chris when he wants to only hide in his treehouse, hence why he wants the booby traps to keep the evil out, or in other words, the inner demons of Charles. After that, Chris goes outdoors to continue performing tasks around the house when he opens the shed door, discovering a letter that reveals more about his mother, Emily. According to the letter, Emily was well liked at her previous school, and her artwork is still on display for all to see at Blackwell Academy. According to the letter, Chris, his mother Emily, and his father Charles resided in Oregon before moving. The mother was accepted to college to strengthen her abilities in the art department, apartment, and her illustrations were well received, but due to an unexpected pregnancy with Chris, she was forced to put her goals on hold for a while. Previous papers show that Charles and Emily met in the library and began studying for their final exams together. Even though they were both engaged in different areas, they fell in love right away and had amazing passion for what they were doing, as well as big hopes for the future. Charles was a local basketball sensation who was rumored to be on his way to play for a prestigious basketball team in Oregon. Emily, on the other hand, was a well-known cartoonist whose work had appeared in print and on the internet, which means that their unforeseen pregnancy with Chris may have prompted them to abandon their dreams, obtain a job, and focus on sustaining their child and providing Chris with adequate child care, despite the fact that they may not have enough and that they did not grow old enough to see their passions and dreams come true. That is why, instead of becoming a famous basketball player or cartoonist, the mother became a kindergarten teacher and the father began working at the rail. As Chris starts crawling through the junk pile left in the front yard, he finds a box with old photos and drawings of his entire family and recalls the pleasant moments they shared and how they used to celebrate Christmas as a family, suggesting that even though it is now Christmas time, it is not the same because the father does not appear to be interested in celebrating like they used to. These horrible memories flood back, making Chris tremendously sad as he rightfully misses his mother. Wiping off his tears, Chris then goes to his treehouse and chants to his toys as if they were his imaginary companions. As Captain Spirit, he requests a thorough report on Storm's damages from his imaginary friend Sky Pirate, but the Sky Pirate assures him that there is nothing to worry about because the magnetic field is shielding them from harm. Chris hides his secret stash in his treehouse, which he confesses he keeps hidden from his father. In the box is a comic his mother drew of herself and father enjoying themselves on Valentine's Day, sharing a dinner made by the father to commemorate the occasion. Chris also collects baseball cards of his favorite players, showing that Chris's preferred sport, unlike his father's, is baseball, which he attempts to keep hidden from his father in order not to hurt his feelings. Charles' drinking problem and aggressive behavior had an impact on Chris and his behavior at school, as the letter from one of the parents reveals that Chris got into a small fight with one of his classmates as the other boy was saying inappropriate things about his father, demonstrating Charles has a pretty bad reputation around the neighborhood and Chris is there to protect him. Even though he experiences abuse from him firsthand, he still loves him and wants to protect him, blaming his father's behavior on the evil alcohol. The school report card shows that Chris has been struggling at school, receiving poor grades in March 2015, indicating he had been failing with schoolwork, maybe as a result of his mother's death. Even though he struggled with several areas, he seems to have done particularly well in arts, as did his mother, indicating that he may have inherited some gift for arts from her. After having fun by himself outdoors, he goes back home to warm up. Inside, he finds his father asleep on a chair, so he decides to entertain himself further. Chris finds a superhero comic on his bed, given to him by his mother, showing how to draw superheroes, hoping that he can one day outgrow her and become everything that she is not, suggesting Emily has never achieved her dream of becoming a famous illustrator and now was pouring all of her love and passion into Chris, hoping that he can continue doing something she couldn't do herself, similarly to the father and his dream of becoming a famous basketball player. While his father is still sleeping, Chris goes snooping around and discovers a code to the lock in the shed that his father installed to keep Chris out. Chris discovers a letter from his grandparents in there. In one of the letters, Grandpa Peter expresses his hope that they will be able to see Chris more frequently. He thanks Charles for the flowers he sent for Kristen's birthday and expresses hope that they will be able to be a family again, despite the fact that Emily will always be missed. Emily's fate is revealed in the newspaper story. According to the report, a reckless motorist hit and ran a local woman. The photo and article discloses that of Emily, Chris's mother, died as a result of fatal injuries caused by an unidentified speeding car, leaving Chris and his father Charles alone and with no idea who the driver is, who had caused them so much agony and sorrow. This tragic incident occurred on December 16, 2014, just a few days before Christmas and a new year, confirming that Chris's poor grades in March of 2015 may have been a direct result of this traumatic event, and the fact that his father does not enjoy Christmas and prefers to spend it drinking and watching games, which may be due to the fact that his mother died died in December, something the father doesn't seem to be able to move on from. Imagine giving up on all of your hopes and dreams, finding a woman instead that replaces all of your dreams and goals, having the idea of a family and having a child, but that is suddenly and abruptly taken away, with all the unfulfilled dreams and goals rushing back, making one truly miserable. Chris eventually finishes making his superhero suit and escapes to his fantasy world as Captain Spirit. Then he goes into his father's old vehicle and pretends he's on a spacecraft heading to his archenemy's Mantroid planet to battle him. On Mantroid's planet, there is a street and a lamppost with tire markings all over, which could be Chris's imagination of what happened to his mother. Perhaps Mantroid is Chris's way of dealing with his trauma, with the hope that if he was the superhero his mother always encouraged them to be, he would be able to defend her from the horrible individuals like Mantroid, seemingly a representation of the head-on runner that caused his mother's death. Mantroid mocks Chris's naivety, telling him he's following a ghost, most likely referring to the guy who hit his mother with a car and drove away and was never discovered. There's also a sign indicating the street where the incident perhaps occurred in. After returning to reality from his imaginary planet, Chris returns to the house to check on his father. Chris notices his father is totally inebriated and unable to stand up straight when he wakes him. His father, as a result, is irritated with Chris for waking him up. Chris then claims that he only woke him up because Charles promised that they would go out to pick up the pine tree, which Charles is unable to do because he can't even walk in his own house, let alone get into the car and drive to pick up the pine tree as he previously promised Chris. When the doorbell rings, the father becomes enraged and orders Chris to inform them, whoever that may be, that they are not welcome here. Chris opens the door to see Mrs. Reynolds, his next-door neighbor, who expresses her concerns over the loud noises coming from the property. She appears to be aware of the father's drinking proclivity and reminds Chris that he is welcome in her home at any time, implying that if he ever feels uncomfortable or unsafe, he should come and see them, implying that the father may be someone Chris is terrified of. That doesn't sit well with Chris, and in order to protect his father, he makes excuses for his father and the sounds that may be heard from outside. Charles becomes irritated by the noisy neighbor, but Chris tries to reassure his father that her visit isn't serious. Charles, on the other hand, believes Chris should have done better and gotten rid of her sooner, implying Chris is not on his side and is trying to cast him as a horrible father behind his back, revealing his vulnerabilities. He then proceeds to physically and mentally abuse Chris by pushing him around and blaming him for his mother's death, implying that he looks and reminds him of Emily, a sight that he can't bear because he is still very much in pain and hurting from what happened to her. Despite Chris's best efforts to be good, do his chores, protect, and spend time with his father always sees him as a burden and the reason for the mother's death, causing Chris to run away in despair and climb his treehouse and fall, allowing him to discover he actually possesses some sort of superpowers as he levitates and stops from the harsh fall to the ground, leading to further injuries. The ending is left incomplete, with possibly more DLCs or follow-up chapters entailing the rest of the story of Chris and his father Charles and what will happen to them or become of them, and if Chris in fact has superpowers, especially as it's in a way tied to Life is Strange universe. So for now we can just theorize if what happened at the very end was all in Chris's mind or if in fact he possesses superpowers. But as we know, he only had superpowers when he was transformed into his alter ego Captain Spirit, going to his imaginary alternate world which doesn't exist and separates him from the real world. But this time around is when he didn't anticipate the imaginary world and didn't go in there. So I guess time will only tell. Alright folks, that's about it for the awesome adventures of Captain Spirit, or at least for chapter 1 or what we have for now. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to stay tuned for more by hitting on the subscribe button and the notification bell. It's been your host Star, and I will catch you on the next one. Have a fantastic day.